And there was, different things that I was trying to figure out how to process, which was a Silicon Valley is traditionally, people that look more like you than me. Um, but then I also was trying to think about within my own community what was missing and what was lacking, and what was it that I wish had existed that could have maybe allowed me to kind of enjoy more than just the business successes of my life in my 20s. I think there's so many, whether it was like chasing certain people down for 6 or 7 years just to have a coffee. Like, clearly the hustle was in the kid, right? But man, we can make things a little easier for each other sometimes.
Welcome to this week's episode of People Are the Answer. I truly believe that people are the only answer to the world's many problems. I'm Jeffrey M. Zucker, a serial entrepreneur, here to learn how innovators are creating outsized, transformational social impact and to shine a light on all the good happening in a world often hyper-focused on the negative. Today's episode features Cortney Woodruff, co-founder and CEO of Assemble. Growing up in Mississippi, Cortney had major aspirations in sports and business and grinded his way around the world to make his dreams come true while learning a ton along the way. In 2020, he co-founded Assemble, which produces its own college-accredited, career-focused courses taught by leading industry experts. By partnering with schools, they're able to share classes with a wide audience of students and improve access to world-class education. Cortney and I discuss his learning in his grandparents' grocery store as a kid, his dedication to academics, how he sometimes spent years opening up opportunities for himself, building and growing a business that helped fitness trainers create thriving businesses of their own, living all over the world, changing education, and much more. Here is Cortney Woodruff on People Are the Answer. Cortney, thanks for joining me on People Are the Answer.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff. How's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
I'm good. We just won the World Series, so LA has a very positive energy in the air today, this morning.
That's a fun energy, like I live in Denver. We've won a couple championships in various sports since I've been here, including the Avalanche, who I'm a huge fan of. So it's like a kind of a happy vibe right around town.
Yeah, it's happy and chaotic.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And it's Halloween, so it's a lot
Yeah.
going on. Yeah.
Are you a big Dodgers fan?
I am. Dodgers, whenever my parents visit, we try to catch a game, and it's just a good environment. It's a staple of LA as much as the Lakers. Yeah, I'm very happy, very excited about that.
Yeah, well, I love it, and I assume they're going to get to do a parade. I don't think they got to last time, right?
It's no. So it's in the morning. I just got the route. It's passing right by my house, so I'll stay safe and look out from out my window.
That sounds awesome, and it's going to be a crazy couple days. Halloween and then the parade, World Series Halloween parade.
It's a lot going on. It is a lot going on, man. But it's all in good fun and good spirit. So hey, we'll take it.
Yeah, no, I hope you're able to enjoy it. And, I like to start off with a little bit of a tough question. In life, generally, what would you say motivates you?
Ooh, what motivates me is seeing things that need to be fixed and addressed, and having the conviction to try to address them, as opposed to just being an onlooker and just standing from the sidelines and watching. That really is one of the driving forces. I can't see things that need to be corrected or fixed and not try to lend a hand. Yeah, yeah. That's kind of my philosophy in life.
I really, really appreciate that. And it's helping people and the ability to help people is such an incredible thing. So I love that you're making the most of it. And, where did you grow up and what was it like there?
Yeah, so to take you back, I am originally from Jackson, Mississippi, and I kind of the earliest memories I kind of have are running around my grandparents' grocery store. So on my dad's side, my grandparents owned a grocery store within the community, and he and his siblings grew up working inside of it, and they had it probably until I was around 7 or 8. So I kind of grew up in a very family entrepreneurial environment and setting, and I just always thought that the coolest thing was seeing our name on the building.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think that just kind of stuck with me, because growing up, if you ask my mom or my dad, the only thing I really cared about was soccer and Bloomberg. And it's very interesting because with soccer, the best players in the world were in Europe, right? So you always had this, I'm in Mississippi and I'm being inspired by something that's across the continent. And with business, being in Mississippi, what was being covered was in New York, in
Yeah.
DC, in big cities. So there's always been this sense of how do I get to the big leagues? And ultimately, I went away to college to Alabama A&M, and I studied economics. And after a year, I ended up moving abroad to Europe and going to business school. And it was there that I just kind of realized that I did not want to necessarily pursue a traditional career that business school would typically prepare you for, but I wanted to be an entrepreneur, specifically within the realm of technology. And I dropped out and I moved to Silicon Valley with maybe 2 weeks worth of money to my name, and that's where we began everything. That's kind of where the genesis of my entrepreneurial tech ventures really began.
That's really cool. I love that you had the inspiration as a kid seeing your family running a grocery store. I mean, the things you can see in a business like that, you can learn a tremendous amount, and it's such an integral piece of the community. And then, to hear how once you had the chance, you went and started exploring and sort of had that entrepreneurial spirit.
I think that, even like thinking about the lessons as a kid, they weren't really like the business lessons because I was too young to comprehend those. But what I do remember is all of the stories and how my granddad and grandmother was known for giving back to the community. Um, and there's just like so many people, like as I got older, that would, you may say your last name and they'll go like, "Oh, you're so and so's grandson? Man, you don't understand. Your granddad was our Santa Claus. He gave our family groceries for free, like just all types of stuff." And I was just like, wow, I don't think you really get a chance to necessarily do that often unless you're an entrepreneur. And that's kind of maybe like where the spirit of having an impact in the community and seeing people around and not necessarily waiting for them to ask help but lending support really comes from. I think that's something that I've had to even just sit back and reflect on to figure out where does that come from within me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's beautiful. It's incredible to be able to see people in your life giving back and then to come back later and then hear stories about it. It's very heartwarming. My dad passed away about 16 years ago, and occasionally I still get stories about, things he did for people and stuff like that. And I know how heartwarming that can be.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of where we, like how I grew up. Very, very simple, southern roots, southern values, Mississippi. So very southern.
I saw, and I'm from South Carolina, so I can relate in that respect. And being a black man in the South is extra tough. And I know you've dedicated a lot of your career to normalizing, black success and leadership. Can you talk about how Mississippi sort of set a baseline of that for you?
Yeah, I think once again, there's just something about being inspired by individuals or movements or things that are out of your reach, right? And so first, you have to have a really strong imagination, and a lot of willpower to to not only learn and see things that are very very far and in the distance, but then you have to have a work ethic that gives you all of the tools that you may not necessarily have just simply because of environment, right? Um, and so I think that is kind of like one of the biggest things that I think Mississippi, or being like in these small places, but you dream big, prepares you for, because you're almost in a situation where if you're aspiring to do something a lot bigger, your life isn't really a list of check boxes, because they just don't exist. So you have to become really innovative and creative. And if you do get out of that scenario, one or two things can happen. A, you may not be prepared just because you didn't have that guidance, or you're going to be just way, way further advanced because of what you had to overcome just to be in the room. And we see that all the time, whether it's you know, it's always the kid that grew up in the favela in Brazil that ends up taking over the sport of soccer across the entire globe. Or
Yeah.
it's always the underdog. It's the kid that grew up with no shoes, playing soccer with a ball made of yarn or something. And in the case of Mississippi, you know, up until the 2000s, two of our African American billionaires in this country had Mississippi roots: Oprah
Wow.
Winfrey as well as Bob Johnson. And so I always thought that was something that was kind of cool as well.
Yeah.
What is it, and how does that happen? I think it's a work ethic, and it's a dream, and it's if you can get out of a certain environment, and not to say Mississippi is a bad environment either, but if you can get out of something and go to something that's even grander at scale, there's some intangibles that are associated with you to even give you the ability to do that, and that normally can be a competitive advantage, of how you navigate the world.
Yeah, a million% on that. And you mentioned how you went to Alabama A and then you
Mhm.
went to study business, and I believe that was in Spain, right, where you went and got worked in
Yeah,
the business
yeah.
school.
IESE.
Awesome. And what did you learn, in college and in that experience in Spain that you brought back? I saw you had like it looked like a lot of financial internships during college.
I did. Everything correlates now to what our new company is, Assemble, which is online courses that are designed by the best industry experts, for college students, and taught by them. And so it's almost like bringing the best people into the classrooms of universities that may not be able to attract them. And I start with that to answer the question, just so you can have context. So undergrad, during undergrad, my tenure in undergrad, I went to a small school in Huntsville, Alabama, Alabama A&M. It was an HBCU, and one of the challenges I had was trying to figure out how to go from the South, school, and get to Wall Street every summer and get an internship. And, you know, whether it was proximity geographically, or whether it was just alumni network or the region of the country I was in, it was very challenging to do that through the school. They just didn't have the infrastructure or the relationship. So I had to really kind of do that on my own, and figure out how to get to the East Coast from the South. And that was a really big challenge. And you just look back on that and think, okay, well, the first thing is, if you might want to go to college that's in cities rather regionally, rather the industry of choice, so that might be like a good step. But that actually invigorated me and made me create my first little tech startup, and I tried to solve this problem for college students, which is now it's being solved. But at the time, there wasn't really anything out there that would allow a student in some rural area to see all of the job opportunities within the industries that they look forward to joining. So yeah, going to the school, I just thought, like, how do I solve this problem? And fast forward, going to one of the most prestigious business schools in the world, there was just such a difference in experience. Any given day, you're on campus, and there's Secret Service because there's a head of state that just have happened to be on campus to speak to you. Um, Everyone's there with a purpose. They're not. necessarily trying to figure out which direction that they're going to go in life. A few people, because they're now older and they want to have a change in career, but for the most part, there's a level of confidence, and there's been a lot of planning that has gone into even attending that type of university and making that type of investment, whether it's bringing your family to another country so you can get a 2-year MBA, or the financial commitment and sacrifice for it, or just the time off from the job for 2 years and maybe falling behind your coworkers as you're in a race for some type of leadership position. And I think by being able to not only be a black male that went to an HBCU in the South, and then, transitioning and going to what would be considered the Iviest of Ivy Leagues in Europe, I've had the unique opportunity to see the pros and cons of both systems. And you get to then correlate the demands of the world and what exists and what's expected, and you can see how those institutions kind of fill those gaps. And so that goes back into what we're doing with the new company, which is kind of trying to empower and help a lot of smaller universities be able to provide those experiences that I was able to get from a more prestigious school.
Mm.
Because ultimately, when you're going out into the job market, you do realize that you spent 3 or 4 years in an institution, you spent money, and you have an expectation to get a job. But industries also have an expectation, and they're not really in the business of understanding why you didn't learn the things that they need for you to be
Mm.
prepared to do
Yeah.
as they get ready to employ you.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I like how you're sort of democratizing the incredible experience that you were able to get, by making it easier for people to witness, these individuals teaching these courses. So I do want to dig into Assemble, but before that, you mentioned your first startup helping people get jobs. Can you tell me about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it didn't go anywhere, but I tell you, it did prepare me because it taught me how to pitch. It taught me how to knock on doors. And ultimately, the iPhone had just came out. So this is 2007. Um, and I just thought the photo gallery was the coolest thing. It was just like so cool the way you had photos in rows of three. And I thought, why not be able to populate the logos of companies that have internship opportunities for students and make it so easy for them to find who's hiring? And that was it. And I spent like 2 or 3 years trying to build a website, learn the code, building presentations, pitching, talking to anyone I could. I mean, if I was in Philadelphia for the summer, I would cold call that missions office. I remember a friend of mine went with me, and we went to Drexel University, and we really had a meeting with that missions office. Like, would your students benefit from this? Um, and that's just kind of like the spirit. There was a problem, I wanted to
Yeah.
solve it for myself. I did a survey, and I figured if I have this problem, a lot of other people have it. It ultimately didn't turn into a business, but it's just one of those things where you see that problem exist, and I actually see students solving that problem now, and I'll typically reach out to them on LinkedIn and just offer advice if I can in any kind of way.
Yeah, love that. And I mean, it sounds like a tremendous learning experience. I mean, I've had plenty of things I've tried that haven't worked out, but you can always take a lot of learnings from them.
Yeah, 1,000%. And it all ties back into what I'm doing now 20 years later,
Yeah, no,
which is
it's
which
really
is
incredible.
crazy. Yeah. It's
Yeah, I mean, I love
insane.
the full circle element of that. Um,
Hmm.
and I was also curious before we dig into Assemble to learn about Trainersvault. I saw you worked on that for many years.
Yeah, I worked on that for a very long time. So when I was in business school, I'll never forget, right before I went, everyone knew that I played soccer at a pretty high level, played Division 1 in college. And one of the problems I always had during the summers as I went away to my internships was finding a trainer to keep me in shape, to get me ready for the first 2 weeks of death, which we call preseason. Um, and at the same token, I was kind of realizing that soccer wasn't going to be what I was going to do after college. And so I was taking the summers really serious, whether it was studying for the CFA or, reading books or trying to figure out if I wanted to take my Series 63 and 7s license, become a stock trader. I was just very committed to academic excellence. And my aunt called one day and said, "Hey, you're home for the summer for the next, you have 3 or 4 weeks here. I don't remember what it was, but would you mind training your cousin?" And I was like, I would, but I can't. I don't have the time. But I know someone that would, and it made me think how many retired athletes are in communities, college
Mm.
students are home, and if there was a dynamic to create a marketplace to help parents find sports trainers for their kids. And so ironically, what really gave me confidence to start the company was right after I started thinking of this idea, I went away to Spain for a week to see what business school would be like. And I thought if I can get traffic on this website in Spain, it may be worthwhile pursuing. So before Facebook and online social media, people would always run around with flyers. And so if you
Yeah.
you go to a concert or a basketball game or a baseball game, by the time you come back out to your car, there would be a flyer on the window letting you know what the next event is going to be, right? And so when I got ready to go to Spain, I had 1,000 flyers printed. And I actually have a photo, I think somewhere around me being at business school campus. So I would go to school during the day. I was scared out of my mind. I had never been to Europe. I was walking to school every day. I went to Starbucks, the bus stop, school, bus stop, Starbucks, apartment across the street. Like I really tried to gravitate to the one thing I was familiar with, which is a whole nother story about the power of branding. And if I ever could like meet with Howard Schultz, I would tell him like he doesn't realize how comfortable that green logo has made me around the world. For decades now. I just always gravitate to a Starbucks because I'm like, okay, the baristas will speak English, and I can just kind of like get a sense of centering myself. But after class, I would walk around and pass out flyers to the website, and I saw all these signups to the landing page and traffic. And some people would be like, no, no, I don't, get away from me, and some people would take it and look because it was different. And that's kind of what made me start this platform, which ultimately I ended up moving to Silicon Valley, and I narrowed it down from sports to just fitness. And it was a remarkable journey, I would say, from dropping out of school, staying in Spain for 1 year, living on faith, ultimately moving to Silicon Valley, where I went from hostel to hostel, stayed in Atherton at this hacker house called Black Box VC on Selby Lane. That was like the coolest experience ever. And ultimately, I end up settling in San Jose with a amazing Taiwanese founder called his name is Bruce Chin. And we had met at an event, and he's like, "Hey, I have a." He's like Ehrlich Bachman of the Bay. He's the Asian
Yeah.
Ehrlich Bachman. He comes to the
That's amazing.
door. He has pink house shoes on and boxers, and he's like, "Welcome to my startup house. I'm working on an idea too." But ultimately, I just wrote a post about this. Bruce really he took me in, honestly, and it was supposed to be a business, and he had all of these foreigners and people coming in and out of his house, and he had 2 rooms, 2 bunk beds, in one room, one bunk bed, and another. And yeah, I mean, it was a
Wow.
startup house pay, but he liked the
Yeah.
idea. I said, "Hey, I think there's a marketplace to help people find personal trainers." And he was like, "I like this idea." He had seen a former professional athlete that was homeless outside of a gas station. And in his mind, he said one day, your platform could be a solution for individuals like that. And he was like, my lucky number is 1.66. If you offer that to me in equity, you can have a bed here as long as you want for free. I was like,
Whoa.
sold, right?
Sold. Yeah.
And so I got really comfortable in in the garage, and I had my space. I didn't have to worry about all the people coming in and out, the guests checking in. I had a garage, an air mattress, a space heater, and a laptop. And ultimately, took the bus to LA once a week once we had a product design, but I stayed in Silicon Valley because I needed to build a network, understand the lingo, figure out, learn as much as I could, around raising capital and hiring people and just understanding that for me was a real MBA. That was like the hard knocks. I left an MBA program and started from scratch, living in someone's garage and was totally happy. But once we ultimately got the product ready, and I had relationships in LA, we migrated to LA and launched the company. And I never said what it was, but ultimately, what we built was a digital management platform for personal trainers. So whether it was them managing their events in the park, there was a platform that could streamline it. And ultimately, I had a lens that trainers were more like musicians and artists with brands, and social media was slowly unlocking so much value in them, and it was giving them new opportunities, whether it was I have a brand and there's I am a brand, and there are merchandise companies and training gear companies that want to pay me, or I have 100,000 followers but I have no way of meeting them all. Well, if you use software, you almost could like create your own tour. You just need the software and the data and the analytics to handle the sales and the ticketing and create a much streamlined process. And hey, once you go on tour, if you're a music artist, what is it that really scales? Streaming. So we built basically a streaming platform for for thousands of personal trainers to be able to upload their workout programs and essentially scale their business. And that's actually one of the I kind of get jaded by how hard it was. But had I not started that company out of my parents' bedroom and my aunt asked me to do a simple thing, which is train my cousin in soccer, I wouldn't be the person I am. That company had so many ups and downs, but everything from remembering when it was just something on a napkin to hitting the $1 million revenue mark, or the second guessing and questioning myself. I mean, I think another thing about startups is patience. I
Yeah.
spent two and a half there was 2.5 to 3 years of developing that before we
Wow.
even launched, and it made $1. So talk about the lessons of believing in yourself, and once you start something, being committed.
Yep.
um and I'm so
Yep. I've been
proud
there.
now because there's so many personal trainers that we were able to take their business from 0 to 100, and there's gems all around the country that people were able to like open up and invest in themselves because we gave them a way to go from just having classes in the park where they were like charging $10 for every a head, and 15 people show up, to having 4,000 4,000 people sign up for our online program and giving them an additional, $500,000 in income a year that they can invest in themselves, and that's just like sometimes I have to stop and think like, wow, we really created that from scratch. Um,
Yeah.
and it took me all over the world. I lived between the United States and Asia for 4 years building and scaling that company.
Wow. That's tremendous. And yeah, I mean, I think the way that you like were able to empower these trainers is really incredible, and like, help them build a life. And you talked about, I saw that on your LinkedIn too, you mentioned you kind of moving around a lot. So, you know, was it, I think I saw 10 places. You lived in 10 different places, in between like here in US and Asia.
I think so. Yeah, I know it's like three continents. So let's see: Spain, China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. 6 countries, and yeah, about 10 cities. Yeah, my 20s are just like a blur of hard nosed grind entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine how much you learned. Like you said, that was the true education. Certainly, how I feel in my own entrepreneurial journey. Like, I'm the type that dives into things, and that's how you learn. And it sounds like you were doing the same. And what what were sort of, you did this, what, 10, 12 plus years working on this business?
Yeah, I did, and I mean, talk about dedicated. I was willing to go wherever I needed to go to to make that work. And ultimately, there's a few things. I had an investor that I was speaking with. He's a good friend of mine, and I call him. He's one of those guys. We talk once every 2 months in some kind of way. When we talk, you once we get off the phone, you it's like a 4 hour phone call, and I was like, that's my if it's outside of my mom, I don't really talk to anyone on the phone. I'm like, that's like all my telephone time for the year, like with him. But he says, like, there's two ways to look at business. You're either behind the business cycle and you'll never catch up, or you are ahead of the business cycle and you just have to wait it out. And for
Mm,
us, we if I take all the accountability of like what made the company work and ultimately what made it not scale and us shutting it down, we were in a way ahead of the business cycle of individuals being able to monetize their content directly with their audiences. And it's really, I could narrow it down to one thing, which was in 2014. It's so obvious now, but
yeah.
we had trainers that were pretty much producing almost like their own music albums. And
Wow.
we were the DSP for it, right? Um, but they were like producing and selling a la carte. And so
Mm,
while we were trying to figure out a way to get them not to cannibalize themselves and put out too much, like every month a new program, but it was too tempting for them because when you start making 40 to 50 thousand dollars a month, you're like, well, wow, I need to keep this going. Um, and we didn't know anything about churn and user acquisition and
yeah.
okay, it's hard to, but we were doing it. Well, the trainers were doing it. They were really reselling to the same 3,500 to 5,000 people a month. But no one had thought about subscription.
Yeah.
No one had, and to the point of there wasn't Stripe. Stripe was still growing. There were still a few other things like balance payments and Dwala, and
Right.
and I mean, this is what happened during COVID with these streaming platforms and OnlyFans and things like. And then the other thing is, I one of the reasons why I have the company I have now, it's because it was so hard, Jeff, to find mentors
Mm,
that could have just simply connected some dots and saw what we were
yeah.
doing and said, okay, based on my 20 to 30 year, experience in media or whatever, I see patterns here. If you could apply these two things to this existing business as you're correlating it to the music industry and unlocking millions of dollars of value, which we were, this thing could be whatever. But I couldn't find a mentor to save my life. I genuinely couldn't until I went really to, like those serendipitous moments. And I went to Asia, and one of our investors now, William Balbine, was really one of the first people in the tech space to just be someone of stature that you look up to, that never made you feel like you were like below or beneath him. But we didn't have it, and I I like to say we really did probably miss out on $1 billion opportunity. Just because I just couldn't see that one. I couldn't see that far ahead of the corner to say, why don't we let each trainer build a subscription instead of reselling to each customer over and over and over again? I mean, it's so obvious now, but once again, this was 10 years ago.
Yeah, you're before the time. It's just early, and like, I mean, everybody in business, I feel like, has those stories of this was too early, this was too late. Like, I mean, yeah, I mean, I certainly have plenty of them, and it's really, I mean, I love the effort and dedication that you put into it. It seems like you got a ton out of it, and I'm sure you built a deep network. And did that your experiences with that business, did that sort of lead you into what is now Assemble?
It did because I remember doing everything we could to scale it. Um, I remember the pushback I received. Um, Remember how hard it was to raise capital. I had to ultimately go to Asia to raise capital, and I just thought, man, it's crazy that I feel more welcomed and supported outside of the country than I do in my own country. I mean, it was just remarkable to me. And there was, different things that I was trying to figure out how to process, which was a Silicon Valley is traditionally, people that look more like you than me. Um,
Right.
but then I also was trying to think about within my own community what was missing and what was lacking, and what was it that I wish had existed that could have maybe allowed me to kind of enjoy more than just the business successes of my life in my 20s. I think there's so
Yeah,
many,
yeah,
whether it was like chasing certain people down for 6 or 7 years just to have a coffee. Like, clearly the hustle was in the kid, right? But man, we can make things a little easier for each other sometimes. And so I thought, every time I worked hard to meet someone, there was probably a 90% chance that they end up really just not being the nicest of people. Um, I'll give you a funny story. I won't say who it was, but one of my first big moments in Silicon Valley, I was flat broke. I had figured out how to get into this conference one night, and it was a prominent um, African American venture capitalist. And at that time, he was like it's not a lot, but he was one of the few. And he had given this talk, and obviously everyone waiting around, and I'm thinking like, I have to meet this guy and tell him what I'm working on. And so I wait after like maybe 100 people go up to him. So obviously the guy's tired or whatever, but we're walking, and I introduce myself, and he's like, well, what are you working on? And I'm like, well, and then he's like, wait, you have to we get to the bottom of the stairs to pitch me. So essentially that's like 2 minutes. So it's like real aggressive and rude, right?
yeah.
Well, I do it. I pitch him, and he's like, okay, cool. I get it. So I follow him out to valet, and we're like right in we're in San Francisco. I forget which area we were in, maybe by the Embarcadero or the financial
Uh,
district. And it's like it's raining a little bit, and it's a little chilly outside, and I'm walking up to his car with him, and he gets in his car, and valet gives him his keys, and he's like, well, email me your information tomorrow. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm like, well, what's the best way to email you? And he looks at me out the side of his window, and he goes, figure it out, and screeches off, and like water flies everything. And it was just like a scene out of
oh
a movie.
man.
And like, I've had that encounter way too many times
Yeah,
with people that, I would respect from afar based on what I read or what I saw
yeah,
or how they position themselves. And I just remember thinking to myself, once again, seeing something and seeing a pattern and not just being someone to
yeah,
sit by and watch it, I thought, okay, you have a lot of people that are very successful in life, and the public is privy to the public persona they choose to put on
sure,
every day, right? But they're smart, and they're where they are for a reason. But I just don't think that we can have a generation of kids that have to spend 6, 7, 10 years working so hard to meet people that they look up to then just to be let down. So how do we create some type of medium where the knowledge can still be shared, but the interaction doesn't have to exist, so everyone kind of wins? And that's kind of why I created a symbol. It was like, how do we create a way for individuals to share their unique insights and protect and shield people from that nasty version of what typically happens, and still be able to learn.
If you're enjoying this episode, I would greatly appreciate if you could review, like, comment, or subscribe on your favorite platforms. Your engaged support goes a long way in helping the show grow and getting our impactful guests heard. Now back to the show. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's so thoughtful, and I think that that experience that you had, like you said, it's something that happens to people. You know, it's hard to blame the person. They just saw 100 people, but like obviously it could have been nicer. It's I think there's this tendency in whether it's just in Silicon Valley or in Hollywood amongst investors of like kind of protecting what you earned and not sharing it. But personally, like my outlook is like I want everyone to do well. We're all going to be better off if everybody's doing well. What can I do to help you do well?
Yeah, I mean, but Michael Seibel, who was one of the partners of Y Combinator. I don't think he's the president now, but maybe for like the last 5 years or so he was. Michael, to your viewers, he was the co-founder of Social Cam, which ultimately turned into Twitch and was bought for billions by Amazon. Um, and he also was the first advisor to Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia, the founders of Airbnb. And they have stories of meeting this random guy in his hotel room in Texas, and they like the shoes I was in. As I tell these stories, and these guys were like broke, eating cereal, and he's just kind of like coming, like the Black Godfather. He's like coming to my room, and he's giving them all this advice, and he ultimately suggested, let me make a few phone calls and try to help you guys get into Y Combinator. And I asked Michael one time, I'm like, man, you got to be like loaded from being their first advisor. And he's like, I actually didn't even get any advisory shares. It's just it's the culture. It's just what you should
Yeah.
do. Um, and I'll tell you this, Michael saved our company. There was this nasty moment where I had a co-founder dispute, and they pretty much ran off to Europe and embezzled all the money in our payment gateway. And I remember um, I didn't know what to do. And I'm going back and forth with the payments platform and about to have a heart attack.
Yeah.
Um, and to protect their butts, they were legally saying like, "Hey, we can't get in the middle of this. I mean, both of you have access to this, so we don't know." And I'm thinking like, who's the most powerful person I know in Silicon Valley at the time? So I email him, and he's like, "Oh, this is a shit show." He said it just like that. And
Yeah.
he's like, he makes one phone call, and I get a phone call, and we got it resolved. And
Wow.
I haven't seen him in years, but occasionally I'll just text him sometimes and just say thank you. Just thank you, because after that whole story, I'm telling you, dropping out of school and 4 or 5 years, and I remember the way it happened. It was like our moment. Like we had things, just everything was clicking. And right as everything was clicking and we were getting ready, and we had the best day of our business. I mean, that day we had like 80,000 in sales. It just disappeared the next night.
Wow. That's heartbreaking.
That's the spirit that I operate in. I don't When I help, and I learned that from Michael Seibel outside of just how I grew up, but it was just very refreshing to see and hear that from someone as prominent as they are. He's like, you don't have to, prey on people and get advisory shares, or
You don't
you
have to be
just,
a bad guy to make it. You
yeah,
can
just
help. It's all
pay it
right.
forward. That's the
Yeah.
spirit of now. That's the spirit to a certain degree, because there's still a
Sure.
good old boys club in Silicon Valley, and a lot of
Yeah.
people can't get into those rooms to be around people that think that way as well. But nevertheless, the
Yeah.
principle exists, and you either choose to abide by it or you don't.
Well, tell me about starting Assemble, and maybe share with our viewers what it is today.
Yeah, so Assemble today, we are an online platform, and what we do is we provide college accredited courses that are designed by the most forward thinking, successful business leaders in the world, and taught by them as well. So if you think about it, it's like a high end online course that is relevant. I think one of the phrases that you're going to start hearing a lot is like learning at the speed of social.
Hmm.
You have to, right? So the problem that we're trying to solve and address is, one university is closing per week in the United States,
Wow.
and so many schools are having issues with enrollment. And then you have this other issue where 40% of employers surveyed are saying that college graduates are not prepared for the workforce. And the graduates, 40% of college graduates also admittingly say the same thing. So there's clearly this disconnect because I think industries are changing really fast. College costs are rising, so it's very hard to justify to a younger generation of students why they should get into debt and why they should pursue a 4-year degree just to then have a piece of paper and have to feel like getting a job is a lottery. It's like
Yeah.
it's like a game of blackjack. Am I going to get hired? Am I not going to get hired? And so what we're trying to do is democratize the experience of an elite education on some of the most prominent campuses and schools. And so for me, it's how do I bring to smaller schools the experience that I was getting at business school, which is, oh, you're taking a marketing class. It just so happens the head of marketing might just be on campus to teach it today. Um, if you're a smaller school with a very low endowment, you're in a remote region of the country, you don't have a vast alumni network, and something like AI pops up overnight, and now all the jobs are, you know, that are attractive because of, whether it's media or it's just what the Labor Bureau of Statistics is saying, how do you quickly create a program around that for your students? And how do you do it in a way where you're not just doing it for the sake of saying you offer it, but also really and wasting these students' time
Yeah.
versus just really being able to do that? So, first we had radio. That's how we had news. That's what updated us, right? And we might hear it all day, but it would take maybe like 8 hours in a day for the news cycle, and then you get a new update. NPR still does that. That's like I listen to NPR every morning, but and then you had newspaper, which was once a day, and then we had cable and television, right? Or satellite TV. And so then you could have the news updated every hour and you could keep up with it. But now we have social and it's every second. And so that's why I go back to the speed of social. Companies are basically required to share with the world that they're keeping up with changes every 3 months when they do their quarterly reports and earnings, right? Earnings reports. But schools have classes that demand students get textbooks that are only updated once every 4 years. So you can start to see very quickly if an industry is changing every 24 hours and the textbooks changing once every 1,500 days. Hello, and so that's what we're doing, and we're working specifically with smaller schools. I think it's very important to be mindful of minority serving institutions, although we're working with all schools across the gambit, but there's just still some discrepancies and some trends that I've seen in the industry, and a lot of smaller schools are kind of getting left behind and looked at as market share more so than the problems that are pressing and need to be solved for them.
Can you explain how working with Assemble works for the schools? Like, let's say I work at a school. I'm interested in working with Assemble. What does that look like?
Yeah, so what we typically do, it's very easy. We partner with schools. We share with them the curriculum and the courses that we are creating. And we work with them also to say, like, are there some topics or categories that you would like to basically have added to your curriculum or your course offerings? And then we produce those classes, and it's very easy. If they already have an online modality and they already have online courses they offer, we're pretty much just creating and supplying them with some new online courses they add it to their curriculum, students enroll, and we split revenue, enrollment revenue. And I'll give you a great example of how we kind of backed up into this. When we originally started the company, we were producing courses that were just for casual adult online learners that
Yeah.
wanted to,
Yeah, I think when we met, that's what you're doing, like direct to consumer online classes.
yeah, direct to consumer online courses. And I won't say which course or which school, but we had a course that had maybe 10,000 enrollments within the first month.
Wow.
And that course and curriculum ultimately end up being added to a university. And so when you start to think about it, anyone on our platform is a person that any institution would just rave to have visit their campus, teach their students, talk to their students. And we were sending a lot of our instructors to USC to do just that. And so I thought, well, if online learning is really what is a lot more engaging for students and we have the content, this should probably be added to universities curriculums instead of us just trying to share it casually or direct to consumer for adult learners. And because it does a few things, when you think about the kid that is on the campus of a HBCU in Little Rock, Arkansas, and they're dreaming to have a career in music, or they're dreaming to get into a career at Microsoft or Amazon. I was that kid. I was that kid that had no relationships, no political capital, all the confidence without even knowing what I needed to be confident in. um, and so there's like no direct pathway for you to even know the tangible or intangible things and what you're going up against. But you're going to be competing with the student who maybe goes to the University of Seattle and they're able to go to Whole Foods or a coffee shop and interact with people that are walking in with an Amazon name badge across their chest and able to sit there and just ask them questions or connect with them or get direct mentorship from people that are already working at these institutions. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to solve. How do we bring that to the individuals that just don't have access to that? The second thing though is for a lot of universities, when you think about 10,000 students taking one of these courses that I just told you about, um, had that been a college course, that would have been around $3.5 million dollars in revenue for that school. And if we're at a place where a lot of schools are relying on grants and funding from the government to stay afloat or to just have any extra bandwidth, whether it's to take that revenue and create new scholarships for students, um, typically a lot of universities don't really have the capacity to be innovative around their business model or to create new lines of revenue. And that's another thing that's very important for us. How do we do this in a way where it just adds? It adds to the
Yeah.
university and it adds to the experience of the students. And so yeah, we underwrite, we invest, we're almost like sourcing the best talent. We're creating the content and we're just sharing it and having a 50-50 split because
Yeah.
it's a great business for us.
It's a
But it
win-win.
also,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a win. It's truly a win-win. All the schools have to do is participate. And I'll tell you another thing, Jeffrey. We're creating curriculum, and it's going into some really big institutions that are household names. And when these courses get assigned the accreditation by some of the bigger schools, that's always really important for us because essentially, you know, a 3-hour course at USC costs $4,000 in the summer. If we're creating curriculum for an institution of that means, we can share that curriculum with smaller schools at a much more lower price, a price that they are already accustomed to charging their students for the same accreditation. And that's when you start to, this thing really gets really interesting. You get a chance to like also ask like, what is happening here in this country for education to be this high? And there's just like so many cool things you can do from an economics point of view, numerically or business model or financial point of view, that starts to like really cut through a lot of the fat.
Yeah. And out of curiosity, do you guys, it sounds like, continue to own the content?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's big.
yeah. It's big, and even like the way we go about it. I don't know my fixation on the music industry, but when we design these, it's a process. We have people from academia, we have professionals, we have TV and film and producers and writers, and we also have students. And we're really trying to create an ecosystem. So even with that, the writer credits, the royalties, we're designing. It's like bottoms up principles. How do we get the smartest people in the room to really know that this one course may get shared across 100 schools? And
And they'll
so
benefit from it, it
and
sounds.
you'll benefit from it as
Yeah.
well every year.
Yeah.
Every semester, it's like, hey, I help put together that class on artificial intelligence as it relates to the automotive industry.
Yeah. That's that's really cool. It's got to be rewarding for those people involved. And so now is Assemble exclusively working with universities, or can someone still go like to you guys directly?
Yeah, so it'll be two ways. So what will happen ultimately is you can go to our website and you can take courses for a reduced fee. But if you are in college and you want the opportunity to use your financial aid and receive the actual course credits, which are going towards your graduation requirements or your major requirements, you're enrolled through the university, and then that's where you also have access to the assignments and the quizzes and some of the more enhanced things that we add to the courses, like the AI simulations, and things of that nature. Yeah.
One thing I'm curious about is, how do you recruit these incredible experts that teach the courses, and then how has that process changed from when you started to now that you're more established?
Um, yeah, that's a good question. When we started, my co-founders and I, we really just went through our network and just tried to find, whoever we could of stature. I think as time has evolved and we have a brand, it's made it easier because we have a product to share and show, right? And who doesn't want to be on screen actually giving back, and we make you look good. I mean, the content is top tier. But I think also with time, what we realize is we don't necessarily have to fall into that game and that realm of a popularity contest, because which helps us too, right? Because we're not having to compete with some of the larger companies like Masterclass and having to pay. I don't know. I'm just using the name, but we don't have to sit here and raise a lot of venture capital and pay Chris Jenner $1 million for a day of work. Our goal is to go maybe find the head of marketing from Apple, and they're not looking at the world through the lens of being a celebrity either, right? They
Right.
might want to get compensated for their time,
Sure.
but it's going to be a lot more economically viable for us. It's going to be a lot more impactful. And once again, what is the goal here? The goal is to create curriculum that bridges with industry and have executives that are seeing the trends, creating the trends, investing in the next what their industries are going to look like over the next 18 months to 3 years, and then also like teaching it. And I think that you don't have to get a 4-year degree and then get another 2-year master's degree just to get into classrooms that are starting to expose you to what the industry needs. No, the goal is to possibly be
Yeah.
employed after 4 years, so we need a balance of a professor that's tenured, um, but you got someone has to be able to talk to the hiring directors and managers and say, what do you need? Well, we need to add this to
Yeah.
the curriculum. Yeah, and so it
Yeah. They
makes
need
it
to
easier
actually
to
work with
find
the
talent.
businesses. And yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I get
That
really
makes
excited about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I love what you're doing and how you're democratizing access to these courses. In you're painting a beautiful picture that I'm seeing in terms of growing the business. Being in more universities, etc. Like, what is your real vision for the future for Assemble?
Well, I would say the one that we can share is I want I want us to have a library and a catalog of classes and courses that spans across thousands of schools within this country and outside of this country. That's the first thing, high level. And then, Jeffrey, there's so much inequality around the world that I already think of ways from a philanthropic point of view where if we have the curriculum that is fueling innovative learning techniques for the next generation of students and arguably the most powerful nation in the world, what does that look like from a lens of philanthropy, right? um let's look at like Sudan and what's going on right there in the Civil War, right? Or the Middle East, which you've been very vocal about. I would argue that there are still going to be a lot of individuals who've been robbed of their education. And then there are going to be individuals who just have to put it on hold. So, what does it look like to have this repository of all of these amazing college classes and be able to donate that to large populations and groups of people? So once again, it's like creating our own Harvard or Howard University at the highest level, and then sharing that so you don't have to not only have survived 10 years of a civil war, and now you got to figure out how to get financial aid and get a visa. No, we can bring the best to you still. And
Yeah.
so I hope that in 10 years, Assemble is this huge company, and I'm spending half of my time on initiatives like that, giving back to the world, as I am making money, or you know,
Yeah.
providing a return on investment for our investors or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's a beautiful vision. Excited to see it come to fruition, and it makes me think about just sort of education in a wider lens. We're seeing, especially over the last 5, 10 years, education start to adapt to the reality that everybody learns differently. You can't just throw a bunch of kids in a room with somebody standing and talking at them anymore. And how do you see your assembles sort of place in the evolution of education?
Yeah, so I spent the last 2 years just kind of really getting deep into the sector. I made some investments in some companies. Um, we do nonprofit work, and I'm a founder. And I think a symbol is essential because education in America is broken, and I think one of the reasons for it is just arrogance of the individuals that have the capital and the resources to solve problems. Um, it's it's a there's a lack of diversity in the space as it relates to the private sector, right? So these are just some of the things I've seen. Um, when minorities come up with solutions and ideas for education, uh, they're typically only funded when they have the structure of a nonprofit attached to them. Now, how and why is that? I don't know. It's just something I've seen. When you look at the portfolios of a lot of the larger companies, it's lacking the diversity, right? And so this begins to get interesting because there's an argument that could say, well, maybe there's just not a lot of minorities trying to create companies in this space. It could be. But then it gets interesting when I speak with investors and I might say, hey, this is what we're doing, and our initial service market are HBCUs. And I mean, your audience, some of your audience may not know it, and it's not a problem for a member of the audience. But, when I hear from an individual that runs a $4 billion portfolio of educational companies around the world, what is a HBCU? I have concerns. And then when I talk to all the analysts that are inside of your firm and they don't know what an HBCU is, which a historically black college university, there are 103 of them, right? It starts to show you that the the capital in the sector and the founders, a lot of the founders are just not aware of certain small sections of the market. And that is just a metaphor of how I think we've gotten to a point where we are letting PhDs and degrees dictate who has the best solutions for all of our kids when you just don't know. I'll tell you, there's a story of, this is random, Margaret Thatcher, who was
Mhm.
Bill Clinton's Secretary of State, when they were initially trying to um, create peace between Israel and Palestine. And she says she sat in a classroom with some Palestinian kids and asked them what did they want to be, and she was genuinely shocked when they responded to her like they don't know. And she said in that moment she realized that she needed to go back and do more research and homework, because the concept of what did they dream of being, they just, it just wasn't a thing, right? And I
Yeah.
see that very often where, you know I don't know all your traditions on a Friday. I remember when we met, I remember all the guys were like, uh walking in observance of of Jewish traditions on Friday. It was like no cell phones and all that. I just don't know because I'm not from your community, right?
Right.
And by the same token, any ethnicity, I might be well cultured and well versed, but you can't just have someone because they have a degree from Dartmouth and Harvard give them the benefit of the doubt to create a solution for everyone. And I think it's just not a smart way to like unlock value.
Yeah.
It means that you're going to have the same group of people trying to solve the same problems, and then it's just getting the resources based on some random X factors of your background or who you know. But we're not really innovating and opening up. So just to go back to your question, the role that a symbol is playing is creating best practices from a different viewpoint and lens with a, I would argue, a very well accomplished founder being myself, um, and applying some of the things that we see that we know work for the broader community to communities and consumers that are literally overlooked and just looked at as market share. It's typically, we create this thing, and if it works for Harvard, 3 years down the line when we need to grow a little bit more, we'll go to smaller community colleges or tribal colleges or HBCUs or just a little small remote colleges that are in small pockets of the Midwest or whatever. But that is the majority of America. So,
Yeah.
it almost turns into a national security issue if we don't have a workforce in the next 5 to 10 years that is competent and have diverse perspectives. And I think that's what the education sector, from what I've seen, needs to really take a look at and address.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, innovators like you and some other people that I've had on the podcast, like Kelly Smith from Prenda or Meredith Olson from Vela. There's people that are innovating in education, so it's exciting to see. I'm hoping that we're moving it in the right direction. Um, and over your career, you've been able to help a lot of people. You've created lives for the trainers at Trainersvault. You've created access to these tremendous courses. Was there a moment or any moments that you recall specifically where it just like really hit you how much your work could directly affect change or change someone's life?
Honestly, no. there's just so much work to be done that I never really stopped to think about it. I mean, like, are talking to you this morning, it kind of made me like go back in time, and it's times where these situations happen, but no, there's just so much work to do, um, and there's just like so much inefficiencies that I guess when you're focused on like solving big problems, it you don't really gloat in past successes. I maybe that's weird. I don't know, but yeah,
No, I don't think it's
yeah,
weird. I think like for a lot of entrepreneurs and innovators, you're so directly focused on your work that it's hard to reflect and to take up a new perspective on it. So I do find that doing like this type of interview does help people reflect a little bit. So like especially
yes,
when you go back and
therapeutic.
listen to it,
Yeah,
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 yeah. So I think when you hear that, you've changed a lot of people's lives for the better, and you continue to do so. So I think it's something that you should be proud of and take a minute to appreciate.
yeah. Thank you, thank you. I mean, but many of them have changed my life as well. It's I can't describe the feeling of having an idea and seeing it through, and it. I mean, for the Trainer's Vault at least, from the day my aunt called me to just the day we launched and made money, that was a lot that happened in between those 4 years. And the average person looking from the outside in would be like, "You are crazy. If this thing hasn't happened and it's been 4 years." But there was just so many things about that process, from spending a year in school, spending another year in Europe, working for a company, leaving and moving to California and staying in the Bay for a year to, a year and a half. I mean, it really took 4 years. But the day you launch and you see, 50 strangers using something that you built, and and you have to really think about, like, okay, they have to take out their wallet, take out their card. That is just a magical feeling. And when you started to see that thing scale, and we might have some ideas that we would come up with, out of our little office, and try it on 5 trainers, and then in 30 days you would see a couple hundred around the world mimicking that behavior. That is just that's worth it. And it's hard to explain that to someone if they haven't gone through that process. I mean, it's once again in a day and age where we need so much gratification instantaneously. How many people can wait 4 years for that moment?
Yeah. Yeah, no, you put it very well.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple more for you, but in the meantime, if you'd like, you can ask me a question.
I just been wondering. We got to catch up offline, but I'm always keeping up with you, and I'm just like, I wonder how Zuck's been doing. That's it.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. No, doing well, and I've been promoting my movie, The Late Game, about one night at a beer league hockey game. That's been a lot of fun. Growing this podcast, People Are the Answer. We've been building a brand around the late game for the hockey community, and then I've been, I've always worked a lot in drug policy and criminal justice reform, and now I'm putting a lot of that time to combating anti-Semitism and the rise of anti-Semitism over the last year plus, and so just trying to do some things that are interesting and fun, and also things that are super. And I think it's all meaningful, but also things that are super inherently meaningful.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and for you, I feel like maybe you kind of have my philosophy. You see something and you really try to get active and solve it, whether it's criminal justice reform or whatever. Do you feel like the deeper you go into some issues, the more passionate you get about it? Because like with education, I mean, I am writing Congress people. I mean, I've just gone deeper and deeper, and you start to see and discover so many things, but it just makes you more and more passionate, because it's like an onion. You're just peeling back layers, and then you go far down the rabbit hole of trying to create a solution around it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I definitely think that that is the case. Become more and more passionate about something as you learn, dig in, and get deep on it. I'll say that like having a little bit of success in your efforts certainly goes a long way to like deepening your passion and dedication to it. Whereas, I've been lobbying for medical cannabis in my original home state of South Carolina for 8 years, and we haven't gotten it passed yet, and it's frustrating. So like, there's moments, whether it's drug policy or criminal justice or otherwise, where that you can get frustrated, but then that just makes you want to dig in more when you really believe it. If you're learning about a topic and you continue to believe more in it as you engage with more people that are directly affected by it, then there's nothing you can do but just keep digging harder.
Yeah, and like I was telling a friend the other day, like this thing is not easy. None of this is easy, and sometimes I feel like we live in a world of it's not what's being done, but it's who's doing it. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that can be frustrating sometimes, but if you just follow the journey, you just slowly still meet who you need to meet, and you just get it done, whether you get the credit for it or you don't get the credit for it,
Yeah.
because ultimately you want to just
Yeah,
see the
exactly.
solution exist and change lives.
And that's an important trait to have, that's how you feel, because there's probably, I mean, there's certainly too many people in our society that want the recognition. And I think like you have to be just as happy when you get it when you don't, whether you want it or not.
Yeah, that I was just curious. I mean, because you're very active with a lot of things, and I think the more you go, it's almost like fuel. You get more passionate the more time you spend on it. Because either you get frustrated, like, okay, I got to solve this now, or you get the results, and so it's like, okay, let's keep going.
Yep. I know 100% that. And, the big question I make sure to ask every guest toward the end of the episode is this. If you could snap your fingers and fix one thing in the world, what would it be, and how do you think that change would reverberate?
Oh man, that's an interesting one. You know, if I could honestly, if I could snap my fingers and change one thing, it would be maybe I would make maybe I would make all human beings colorblind. And and I think the reason why is because there's so many microaggressions, with just racism, whether it's anti-Semitism or racism, and just being African American. I'll say one thing is, there are certain groups of people that can just blend in. Um, with this color skin, you can't wipe this away, right? And so when you do encounter people that are biased, it's hard, right? Um, and a lot of times, as I work with the youth now, I just was with some kids at Fresno State, and was four seniors. No one knew what they wanted to do for um, after high school. But the thing that was interesting was just the body language and the confidence. It's like
Mm,
amongst themselves, they were regular young adults, but you could just see this path of there's not going to be confidence to leave outside of your own little four walls to navigate the world and society,
mm,
right? Or to go amongst diverse communities or groups of people, and that's just kind of a pathway of a life that probably won't get the best out of you as an individual. Meanwhile, there are kids right now preparing to go to Stanford next year as freshmen, and they are really thinking they're going to create the next Google before they graduate.
yeah.
And so part of it has to be with how we see ourselves, all of us, the lessons we share and teach amongst our family, our loved ones, or just individuals around us. But part of it also is that it's like a trained behavior also to kind of feel and second guess yourself if you're not raised with all of that confidence because of how you may be seen or how you may be perceived. There's certain biases. So I think, man, if we could maybe we don't need to be colorblind, but if we could solve that problem where people don't see, you know, color or ethnicity or backgrounds, I think the world could just be so much smoother.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like oftentimes with this question, like empathy comes up and, people caring more about other people. So it all fits in, it's just like, how can we make our humanity more cohesive? And I certainly hope that we're on the path to that. I know the media doesn't make us feel like it, but I like to think there's multiple good things going on for every bad headline out there.
Yeah. Hopefully, yeah. I mean, it has to be. It just has to be. I refuse to believe that it's not, you know?
Absolutely. And how can people listening that, are inspired, want to follow your story, how can they support you and your impact?
So they can email me directly at Courtney@assemble.fyi. And I love LinkedIn. I just love reading and following businesses and stories, and they can. That's where all the updates go. I mean, I have the Instagram and the Twitters, but I'm more of a business social person than a leisure social person. So yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn at Cortney Woodruff. Yeah, it's just my name.
Yeah, and if we got any universities out there that are looking to partner, certainly reach out to Courtney.
Yes, please reach out. We are working with some major institutions. I'm really excited about 2025. We have courses that are going to be related to careers in the space industry, obviously AI, digital marketing. We just got a course approved at a really big university on podcasting, actually, because every student's a brand, and this is, Joe Rogan, $100 million deal. It's not just a hobby anymore. It can be a real business. How do you spin that up and do it in an economically viable way? And how do you, recruit and just all of the good stuff around it. So yeah, I'm, I'm really excited. And we got to catch up offline too. Talk about your production company and some of the stuff we're doing.
Yeah, no, I would love to. And I mean, I'm so thankful that you were able to give the time here and to join me. Really excited to share your story with the audience, and obviously excited to continue our conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. It's good to catch up. It's been too long.
Agreed. Thanks for checking out this episode of People Are the Answer. For more information, go to peoplearetheanswer.com. Please like, subscribe, rate, whatever you can do on various platforms. We really appreciate the support. And if you're interested, check out my other podcast, The Late Game Podcast. You can learn more at thelategame.com. Thanks.